Well, hello. Welcome to 10 Inventions That Changed the World. My name's Eric Hanscom. I'm a patent attorney at Intercontinental IP here in Carlsbad, California. And my friend Dave Branfman and I are going to be going over 10 inventions that changed the world. Now, not all of these inventions are famous because they're often years ahead of their time. Not all of the inventors made any money off them, but they are 10 inventions that are truly important. Dave, you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Eric. I'm Dave Branfman. I'm of counsel to a firm also here in Carlsbad, Branfman, Mayfield, Bustarde, Reichenthal, LLP. And Eric and I have clients in common, and we've known each other and been friends for many years now. And we have a great time doing these kinds of presentations and programs.
Great. Thanks, Dave. So again, we're going to be going over 10 patents that changed the world, and we're going to start with Hedy Lamarr. Now, many of you have heard of Hedy Lamarr and know that during the 1930s and 1940s, she was considered the most beautiful woman in the world. And Hedy Lamarr often said that her face was both a blessing and a curse. A blessing because it opened an awful lot of doors for her, and a curse because people couldn't see behind it and realize that she was truly a brilliant woman. So anyway, Hedy Lamarr was born in Austria, I believe 1914, 1915. And by the time she was 19, she married a man about twice her age who was one of Austria's main munitions manufacturers. And she quickly realized that she was going to be relegated to being a trophy wife until she bailed on him, which she did. But before she bailed on him, she was the wallflower at a number of dinners that included such guests as Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler, and they would talk to her husband about various weapons and how they could improve them and what kind of weapons might come in handy for a war. Anyway, so Hedy Lamarr listened into this quite intently, and after she had left her husband and moved to the United States, she came up with something called frequency hopping, which has given rise to Bluetooth, cell phones, and basically a whole lot of other things that we take for granted now. And we can thank Hedy Lamarr's 1941 patent for being the first one that really opened the door for that. Now, in 1941, there was some experimentation being done with radio-guided torpedoes. So you'd have a radio transmitter that would then guide a torpedo. At the time, they would operate on the same frequency. And by operating on the same frequency, it would give an enemy enough time to pick up the frequency and send jamming signals to cause the torpedo to veer off course. So Hedy Lamarr came up with the idea of frequency hopping. That is, the radio transmitter and the torpedo would hop from different frequencies on a regular basis, and they do it simultaneously, so the radio transmitter could still control the direction of the torpedo, and it wouldn't give the enemy enough time to pick up on that frequency and jam it. Now, at the time that she and Rick Antheil, who is her co-inventor on this, got their patent in 1941, they presented it to the U.S. Navy. The U.S. Navy said, we're not interested, and there are different stories. One is that they weren't really working on radio-guided torpedoes anymore. The other is they took one look at Hedy Lamarr and said, you're too beautiful to have invented anything that we really want to look at. Hedy Lamarr even went so far as to put her maiden name on the patent application because she was afraid this was going to happen. Anyway, so she got a patent in 1941. It is number 2,292,387. You can tell how old a patent is by the number it begins with. Dave is going to soon talk about a patent that doesn't even get into the millions. Patents being issued today for utility patents that protect the function of an item, these are generally in the 10 million range. So anyway, this was a fairly early patent. Navy said they weren't interested, but later on they did indeed incorporate this technology into sonobuoys. Unfortunately, Hedy Lamarr never got a bit of thanks or credit or money for this until she was finally inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. Hedy Lamarr, never being one to understate her own accomplishments, is rumored to have said, well, it's about time. So anyway, so that's Hedy Lamarr and frequency hopping with torpedoes. Now, this also brings up another sort of interesting issue, and that is inventorship. For you non-IP attorneys, when you file a patent application, you're under an obligation to list the first and true inventors. And so, if you're a beginning IP attorney and you're, working for yourself and getting clients from the Chamber of Commerce or whatever you do, you'll run into a lot of people who will say, well, I want to put my wife or my girlfriend or my cousin on the patent application because I like them. Well, you can't do that. They've got to be a first and true inventor. And so over the years, there's been a lot of controversy over whether Hedy Lamarr really thought of these ideas on her own or whether she may have borrowed them from Hitler or Mussolini. And so anyway, she claimed the ideas herself, her own. Her co-inventor said she thought up the idea completely on her own. And so my view is that her patent issued in 1941. If Hitler and Mussolini were all upset about not being listed as co-inventors, they should have taken a plane over to the U.S., appeared in U.S. federal court, and argued their case. And then maybe a black limousine from the CIA could have kind of taken them somewhere and they wouldn't have made it back to Germany and Italy, respectively, and World War II would have been over quickly. So as far as I'm concerned, Hedy Lamarr, first and true inventor. I'll take Hedy's word on this one.
Eric, how does frequency hopping for those purposes relate to cell phone technology?
Because that's what a cell phone does.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's actually the frequency hopping idea fits into Bluetooth, cell phone, basically any kind of electronic communication. Unfortunately, it hasn't fit in to robocalls or spam emails yet.
Right.
So I wish we still had Hedy Lamarr around. Maybe she could figure out something on that. So anyway, this Hedy Lamarr is not a one-trick pony either. She also advised Howard Hughes on the plane design. And at the time of her death, she was working on a new stoplight, a fluorescent dog collar, and a way to fix the Concorde so it wouldn't have any more problems. So anyway, quite a brilliant woman, and it's unfortunate that she didn't get more credit during her lifetime for her inventions. Okay, so speaking of patents and technology, we had a little technological problem. This is the second time Dave and I have taped the first part of this show, so you'll notice some differences in the clothes we wear, and I think that my hair has grown out probably about 2 inches from Goodyear until the next discussion, which is going to be over the drones, I believe. So anyway, if you see some changes in us, you can blame it on technology, and if Hedy Lamarr was still around, I'm sure she could have fixed it.
I agree. There we go. All right. Well, I'll pick up from here. I've got 5 or so patents that I'd like to talk about, and I'll start with the oldest one first, just for fun. And the oldest one on my list is Charles Goodyear's patent issued in 1844. So way more than 100 years ago, almost 200 years ago, depending on how quickly you want to round up. So 180 years ago, I guess, for what is called an improvement in India rubber fabrics. That's the formal title.
Rather descriptive, but it gets right to the point, doesn't it?
We would probably call it vulcanized rubber.
Yes.
In 2022.
And trademark vulcanized.
Right.
Yeah.
And trademark vulcanized. And essentially, the legend is that in 1839, Charles Goodyear, for whom the Goodyear Tire Company was named, but he was not a founder of the Goodyear Tire Company. I guess it was named by the founder of the Goodyear Tire Company either as an homage to him or as to capitalize on his goodwill, maybe a little bit of both. But the legend is in 1839, Charles accidentally dropped some India rubber, I'll talk about that in a second, mixed with sulfur on a hot stove and discovered vulcanization. Someday, maybe we'll do another program on the top 10 inventions discovered by accident.
Yeah.
That would be a fun one.
That'd be a good one, yes.
And so his process, if you will, for treating what's called India rubber, which is material brought to the West by Europeans in the 18th century from the Indies, hence India rubber. And the word rubber became known, and the product was dubbed rubber because of its ability to rub out pencil marks on paper. That's where the term rubber comes from. So, but the idea behind, or the application behind Charles's invention is to basically harden rubbers by treating rubbers this way and getting it to be able to do different things like make tires.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, as I understand it, the idea of using rubber for clothing and boots was not new. As a matter of fact, there's a guy named Macintosh who first came up with the idea of a kind of a waterproof ocean person's clothing. But because in the United States we had very hot summers and very cold winters, especially back in the northeast portion of the United States, that in the summers the rubber boots would melt, and in the winters they would crack and split apart, as opposed to England that has a more moderate climate than we have here. And so rubber initially was not very popular because it didn't work very well. And until Goodyear figured out how to...
It melted easily or cracked easily.
Cracked easily, yeah.
And I should mention that part of his patented process is involved application of heat.
Yes.
And we know probably from, or you know from probably many, many inventions that heat is often a factor that's used to get a process to do something that we want it to do. Right,
yeah. As a side, my wife is Thai, and she has a rubber tree plantation over in Thailand. It's not a very big one, but the rubber that comes out of the trees is basically useless. You've got to do all sorts of things for it. You've got to bake it. You've got to roll it out. Get the water out. Then you have to put it into sheets, and you have to heat it. And that's even before you sell it to the people who make the tires. So anyway, it's a long and complicated process, but we wouldn't be anywhere without Goodyear.
And speaking of which, since he got this patent in 1844, something we haven't talked about in this program, what we've talked about in other programs is, I'll just throw out the elephant in the room, which is the patent still good?
No. Patents expire. Yeah.
Patents expire.
Yeah.
Why is that? Why do well, typically, how long is a patent good for, and why does it? Why do we say it should expire?
Well, right now, a design patent is good for 15 years from the date of issue, and a utility patent is good for 20 years from the date of filing. Now, since it usually takes average of 2 or 3 years for you to successfully prosecute a utility patent, you usually get around 17 years useful life of a utility patent. The reason they expire is it's a patent is basically a deal between you and the U.S. government. The deal is, okay, inventor, if you put down in your patent application enough information so somebody after your patent expires can take your invention and make it for the benefit of everyone in the United States, we'll give you a limited monopoly on this idea to give you the right to prohibit others from making, use, or selling the invention. So we're giving you some rights for a relatively short period of time if you have a really good invention, in exchange for you basically putting in your patent a blueprint for how other people can use it later on.
Theoretically, and I think in the real world too, not just theoretically, that incentivizes people to spend the time, spend the money to invent stuff.
If you couldn't protect it, why bother? I mean, none of us would be, nobody'd have R&D. You'd just be stealing ideas from other companies, and there'd be no incentive to invent anything, and we'd probably, be still in the 1800s. So, yeah. As opposed to trademarks, which can be extended forever.
Forever.
Yeah. So, okay.
All right.
Good. Next in line, we have a 1962 patent for the first quadcopter. Now, this really surprised me. I'm heavily into drone flying as a hobby, and I was really surprised. I thought the first drone patent would be in the early 2000s. And when I saw that there was a drone patent back in 1962, my initial reaction was, yeah, this has got to be a joke. But it wasn't a joke. This person, this E.G. Vanderlip, figured out when he filed for an omnidirectional vertical lift helicopter drone, figured out a whole lot of the factors that go into today's drones. And so if you look at the patent, I know you're going to be looking at it while I'm speaking here, you've got 4 propellers, which this is a modern drone. It has 4 propellers. And this drone even has collapsible arms to make it easy for storage, because this drone was intended to go on an aircraft carrier where, you know, space is at a premium.
Right.
And this was gasoline powered, whereas this is battery powered. But at the same time, they thought of a whole lot of stuff. Now, they would vary the pitch of the propellers for lateral movement, whereas with this drone, what is changed is the RPMs of certain propellers to get it to move. So if you want it to move forward, you get more RPMs on the rear. It turns it like this and it flies forward. If you want it to go sideways, you get more RPMs on the right two propellers, and it turns like this and moves sideways. So this is a little bit more sophisticated of movement technology, but this is also 60 years after the fact. So, you know, in 60 years, they'd better come out with something better. And so anyway, they figured out essentially every component of the modern drone other than battery power and having a really nice camera on it to take pictures.
Right.
But they had figured out pretty much.
Was the inventor ever able to monetize or capitalize this on his lifetime?
No, nobody.
Just too far ahead of his...
Yeah, he was too far ahead of his time. And he actually, if you look at one of the figure one, he even had a situation where the propellers would intersect, and they had to be timed. Now, if you notice with this drone, they could intersect, but they're on different planes. So even if they overlap, as they do right here, you're not going to have one propeller hitting the other. And this was, I think, primarily designed as a military drone, but had the person who invented this over in his Hong Kong college dormitory thought about it, you know, way back then, and had they put a camera on this could have been the first quadcopter spy drone.
Right.
So anyway, very, very interesting technology, and one that goes way back. And this particular patent even figured out landing skids and things like that. And each motor is independently controlled to keep the drone level if you want it level.
And the inventor is basically unknown in the modern drone era?
I've been flying drones for about 8 years now, and this is the first I've ever heard of the guy.
Amazing.
Yeah, and I did a search for drone patents, figuring, okay, I'm going to find something Hong Kong 2010, 2011, and I found this. I thought, you got to be kidding. And then I thought, okay, this patent's going to be a joke, but it wasn't. This Vanderlip figured out everything ahead of time.
Kind of amazing. Way
ahead of his time.
Yeah. Well, speaking of being ahead of his time, if we should move on.
Sure.
We'll move on. I'm going to go back in time from the drone patent, but forward in time from Goodyear's vulcanization. I'm going to zip ahead to 1861, right around the time of the Civil War, when E.G. Otis got a patent on what's referred to as a hoisting apparatus. We would call it an elevator. And what happened was, and if you think about it, I'll go back in a minute and talk about what happened, but if you think about it, up until the elevator became useful and functional, and lifts and platforms had been around for probably hundreds of years,
yeah,
if not thousands of years.
Right.
But they were not particularly safe.
Yeah.
What Otis really figured out was how to make an elevator that could safely go up and down without the ropes and the cables snapping and people crashing to the ground. Big improvement.
Which is everybody's main fear. When you get in an elevator,
right,
especially if you're going to the Empire State Building, you're looking at your feet and you're thinking, you know, I'm 40 floors above death here. This is scary.
So by the 19th century, sure, we could build buildings that were 4 stories tall,
mm-hmm,
5 stories tall, 6 stories tall, 7 stories tall. But once you get above 6 or 7 stories, yeah, who wants to walk?
Who wants to carry stuff?
And who wants to carry stuff?
You want to carry a grand piano up to the 8th floor of the Triangle Building?
So it made skyscrapers virtually impossible, even if the construction techniques and materials were available. And really, if you think about it, back in those days, we were a horizontal walking society where the top of a church steeple was probably the height of what we would see at the limit of the skyline. With the elevator, now all of a sudden, you can start building 10, 20, 30, 40, 50-story buildings. And one could make the argument that the elevator really laid the foundation for the modern city.
I think you're right.
And the way it happened was Otis was hired by the owner of a store that sold fine china.
Okay.
E.V., I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it, Howhout. H-A-U-G-H-W-O-U-T. He owned a fine china store.
Yeah, okay.
And he wanted to be able to store stuff and move stuff. And so he hired Otis, and Otis figured out how to safely overcome the problem with fraying ropes, overloaded platforms, and belt failure. And he essentially came up with a clamping arrangement that grips guide rails on which the car or the movable platform, I say car, I mean movable platform, moves when tension is released from the hoist rope. So basically it's an elevator braking safety mechanism.
Yes, I understand it. That it was spring-loaded, and it was in a retracted position unless the rope broke. And then if the rope broke, the springs threw some arms out with teeth, and they grabbed onto the teeth of the side, which is kind of a scary idea to me. But apparently it worked, and it was better than the existing technology.
Apparently part of the way he got the word out was he would do kind of exhibitions where he would, go up high on one of these things and yell out, "Cut the rope!" Right? And people would stand around expecting him to crash and die.
I bet.
And he didn't.
Yeah. No, that's an interesting one.
Yeah. Great one.
I wonder why the elevator didn't become known as the Otis instead of the elevator.
Good point.
Because so many other things we all know about. There are other names. Like I remember
Goodyear.
Goodyear, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. When I was
Goodyear's synonymous with rubber and tires.
Yeah. I know when I was a little kid, a teacher would say, "Go get a Xerox of this," and then Xerox said, "No, you don't get a Xerox of this. Only you get a photocopy of it with a Xerox or one of the other competitors' machines."
Right,
So,
and Jello did a big, for years they spent a lot of money on, don't say I want Jello, say I want Jello brand gelatin.
Jello brand gelatin, a little bit longer. So I don't know.
That's
an interesting one.
But Otis is still, the elevator company's still around.
Yeah. I hope that Otis's descendants are the ones that are making a lot of money off that, because that would be nice to see.
Although if the patent expired,
but I'm sure they have a trademark on Otis, and they're continuing to milk that. If you want a good elevator, get an Otis. Because,
that's right.
And they've got a perfect one, because it's not like a brand of coffee where a good coffee or bad coffee isn't going to kill you, but a bad elevator could kill you. So you probably want to get a really good one.
Talk about brand name recognition.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that for anybody out there who's technically oriented, this is patent number 31128, issued on January 15, 1861.
Yeah, and you've got to see. I'm sure Jason's going to put these up. You got to see the drawings for this one.
Oh yeah,
it looks incredibly complicated, and yet it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and yet there's only 4 claims.
Well, that's something interesting to note too. That a lot of these patents that we're talking about are very, very short. For example, Hedy Lamar's patent is 6 pages, including 2 pages of drawings. And the claims they're very simple. It makes me wonder why we write such complex claims these days.
Eric, maybe this is a good time to just spend a minute or two on what's the difference between all the stuff that goes into the front end of the patent, all the description and everything, and then they always seem to end up with what I claim is.
Yes. Well, with a utility patent, where the function of the item is what's important, there's basically a written description of the invention, and that generally sets forth, this is the field in which the invention lies, this is what my invention is, this is why my invention is so much better than anything else that is out there. It refers to some figures that illustrate the invention, like those figures of Otis's elevator patent, and then it ends up with the claims, and the claims are the individual nuggets of intellectual property that you enforce or don't enforce in court. So that's a utility patent that protects the function. A design patent is different because that just protects the shape. And so with a design patent, generally the protected item is the shape that you've protected through your drawings. So here's an example here. This is a utility patent that we got. This is a rockfish release device. Now, for
what
rockfish release device?
Rockfish?
Okay. So if you're a fisher person, to catch rockfish, you got to bounce the bait off the bottom. And so sometimes the bottom is 200, 300 feet down. And so you're bouncing your bait off the bottom, you catch a rockfish, and you reel it up, and you say, oh man, that's a vermilion rockfish, it's protected, or that rockfish is only 8 inches long, I've got to release it. Well, because of the barometric pressure, by the time the rockfish is reeled up to the surface, it's basically it's going through barometric trauma, and it's getting gas in its air bladder, and it's usually its tongue is expelled from its mouth. So you've got to get it back down to depth if you want to release it. And what they've been doing in the past is they just take the poor rockfish. Well, I'm not going to keep this as a keeper for my limit, but I'm just going to throw it in the water. The rockfish can't get back down because its air bladder is expanded, and it's just flopping at the surface, and either seals come by and pick it off or birds pick it off. So if you want to get it down, this is an invention where you come up to your rockfish, you want to get it down. You pull this open, put your rockfish's lip there. There's a nice soft thing here. And then you have your line here, and you have a heavy weight here. And you drop it over the side of the boat, wait until it hits the bottom. You can tell it hits the bottom because it stops taking line. Then you tighten up the line, and you give it a quick jerk. And this opens up the jaws, lets the rockfish go at 200 feet down, where the air is dissolved back into the rockfish's body.
And the fisher person can then reel back in.
You reel back in, you release. Yeah, so essentially if you're a sport fishing boat, you should have a couple of these that are just set up to release the rockfish. So in other words, the function of this is what's important, which is why it's something good for a utility patent.
Right.
Frankly, these jaws are round. They could be square and accomplish the same thing. We've got a spring here with one round in it. We could do 2 or 3 rounds or something like that. So that's good for a utility patent where the claims are written out and they claim what we claim. This is a good example of a design patent. This is a coffee mug shaped like a rattlesnake. And we can't get a utility patent on a coffee mug because the prior art, it goes back to the first cave person who knocked the horn off a dead bison and said, hey, it's hollow, I can put water in here and drink out of it. The idea of a container with sides and a bottom that holds liquid, that's not novel, but one shaped like a rattlesnake is. And so anyway, this is a good example of a design patent where the claim is basically the 7 drawings of this. And they say, you know, we claim a rattlesnake mug as shown in the drawings. So, and anyway, are you going to head into, do you want to head into the Apple right now?
I could head into the Apple, or I was going to go to...
okay, well, we'll...
Should we...
Okay, yeah, we can give a brief overview of this once we get through the Apple. Okay, that sounds good. Okay, so the next one I have is following Hedy Lamarr down a few decades. We've got the first global positioning system, or GPS, patent. Now, this was a really interesting one. It was granted in 1974, which is in a way, it's a little bit scary because that means that it was not that many years ago when if you were out hiking and you got lost, there's no way you're going to be able to tell where you are unless you're good at reading a topo map.
Right.
So essentially, the GPS, it is patent number 3789409, granted January 29th, 1974 to Roger Easton. And they had satellites before, but before GPS, the way you had to find out where you were is you'd have to send out a ping, have it come back to you. You could figure out from the Doppler effect where you were that way. The problem is this was designed for military situations, and so if you're a team of Navy SEALs and you're behind enemy lines, you don't want to be sending out pings because then you find out where you are, but the enemy finds out where you are too. So this was actually the first system by which you could figure out where you are through satellite telemetry and without having to take any assertive action on your own. And basically it's something called triangulation, where if you have 3 satellites and you know where they are and you know how far away from them they are, each one draws a circle, and those circles only intersect at one place, and that happens to be where you are. And so if this was kind of an interesting one. It was only about 8 pages, but if you look at the claims, the key part of the claim here is they say a satellite system comprising at least 2 satellites, the instantaneous location of which are precisely known, and each satellite transmits signals. And then you've got a navigator's station for receiving the signals. And the key is the last line here: without the necessity of betraying the presence of the navigator's station by an interrogation signal. So it was stealth. You can figure out where you are. And so it was designed for military operations, but obviously GPSs fit into a whole lot of things. I mean, one thing about our society is we're getting less and less functional in terms of what we can do ourselves and more reliant on things like GPS to tell us where to drive, how to get there. Right. It's really, try doing disaster relief without GPS. There's even sports made out geocaching where people will take some sort of an item, and if you go out to Anza-Borrego State Park, there's a bunch of dinosaur sculptures there. They'll hide their little geocache there, and you're supposed to take your geolocator and find it. And I've seen people, it's quite funny because they'll be looking all over the state park for this thing, and they'll finally find it in the fingernail of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. It's good for geofencing, which is something that's coming in more and more with drone technology. How do you keep things away from an area, a secure area? It's used for aircraft tracking, navigation, obviously, surveying, and tectonics. As the plates get further and further away from each other in areas like Iceland, they'll set up a GPS location that will say, for example, there's a place there called Thingvellir, where the North American plate is pulling away from the Eurasian plate, and because of GPS, the exact GPS, they know that it's pulling away at about 3 centimeters a year.
Wow.
And so they can use it also in Indonesia. There's the horrible Boxing Day tsunami in 2004 that wiped out a huge portion of Indonesia. They're actually using GPS to see if the plates are rising or falling, which is why the scientist who predicted the Boxing Day tsunami is predicting in the next couple of years there's going to be one that's even worse, and he's even picked the spot right off Sumatra where he thinks it's going to happen based upon the movement of the islands there.
And has anybody taken his prediction seriously?
They are now.
Yeah.
before the 2004 earthquake, nobody really was. Now at this point, I was just watching a documentary, and he shows up at the beaches, and he gets off his panga to teach the people about earthquakes and what they should do. And the whole village runs down and treats him like he's the conquering hero. Right. And so he tells them, okay, there's the hill. This is probably how high you have to get on the hill. Once the earthquake, the tsunami alarms sound, because you're in a village right here, you have about 20 minutes to make it up there. And so it's coming in very, very handy. And again, We have Mr. Weston to thank for this patent. We have Hedy Lamarr to thank for the idea behind it. Okay, what do we have next?
Okay, next, I'm finally getting out of the 19th century into the 20th century. This is one of my favorites. It has a fairly innocuous title, patent number or name. Patent number 1397824, self-serving store.
That sounds extremely boring to me.
Pretty boring.
Yeah.
Sounds like.
Yeah.
But let's think about it for a second. Issued in 1921, so this is just, 101 years ago.
Depression era.
Right.
Yeah.
To Clarence Saunders of, I believe, Memphis, Tennessee?
Never heard of the guy before. Yeah.
Well, what Clarence figured out was back in the old days, and you'll know this, or this will ring true if you watch old westerns and stuff like that. In the old days, if you went to the store to buy your groceries or buy whatever supplies, you walked into the store and there was a person behind the counter, and you had to tell the person behind the counter what you wanted. And then he or she would then go either onto the shelves behind the counter and grab things for you and put them in a box or a package for you, or back into the storeroom, and basically you had to wait to be served. Clarence figured out that if you set up a store properly with basically aisles, you could direct people into the store, through the store, and then out of the store, not before they go to the checkout counter to pay. And he basically invented the self-serve store, what we all now take for granted going into any grocery store or convenience store.
What was the date on that patent again?
1921.
Wow.
And it refers back to, I noticed that it refers back to a prior patent in 1917, only 4 years earlier. And from what I've gathered reading this, the earlier patent really was, I guess, the first one on the self-serve store with aisles that you had to walk through, and you had to walk through all the aisles.
Yeah.
Even if you only wanted one thing from one aisle, you had to walk through the whole store, the maze, to get to the end. And the 1917 patent, I believe, the aisles and the cabinets and the displays were all fixed.
Okay.
The 21 patent, by 4 years later, Clarence had figured out, gee, why not make the cabinets and the displays movable and configurable, and give the store owner the opportunity to set up the store the way he or she wants in terms of size, configuration. But the concept was the same, which is you enter at a certain spot, you have to walk down the aisles, you grab your stuff, and eventually you make it to the checkout counter where everything gets packed up and you pay.
That's just amazing to me, because that means that my grandparents were alive when you had to go up to a counter and wait in line where the poor stock clerk would be hauling all your stuff down.
When I first started looking into this, because I had heard about it, but I didn't know all the details, I would have bet that the first patent for the self-serve store would have been in the late 19th century.
Yeah, I agree.
But
wow.
And this, I'm not sure if Clarence was the founder or co-founder of the Piggly Wiggly chain of grocery stores, which I think still exist.
I think they do too.
And if I'm not mistaken.
I've got to say too that I know where I live, we shop at Ralph's and Vons and Stater Brothers and Costco.
Right.
I would love to shop at a store called Piggly Wiggly.
Me too.
Why do people think of better names for things these days? I feel like in the trademark
Right.
area, there's so much room for better names. I mean, at least in Canada, they named their famous coffee chain after a former hockey player. I mean, you know, Tim Hortons, eh?
Yeah. Right.
But yeah, here it's like, yeah, let's go to Ralph's. If I could take my family to Piggly Wiggly, that would be an event for the whole family, as opposed to just, let's just go to Ralph's, get some stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, great name.
Yeah. No, I
Great
agree.
name.
I agree. Oh, that's.
And just by reference, there are only 5 claims in this patent.
How long is the patent, do you think?
Let's see. There's a couple
Pictures,
pages of
pictures.
drawings, and then
3
good
pages?
2.5 pages of description.
Okay.
And then 5 claims.
Wow, times have changed, haven't
Yeah.
they? Yeah. It actually makes me give some serious thought to exactly how long and how convoluted do patent applications need to be now.
Right.
Could we maybe write one that's short, gets right to the point, says, this is the field of my invention, this is what I have, this is why it's better than other people's, here are my claims. Yeah. I bet the examiners would like to read that a lot better. I mean, they see 50 pages of written description and 25 pages of claims. If I'm an examiner, I'm going to say, okay, this patent gets to the bottom of this stack.
It would
I don't
drive
want to
me
look
crazy.
at it. Yeah. What did Einstein?
Yeah.
He began as a patent examiner and then turned into a genius. Well, he's probably a genius back then too, but he had more opportunities than Hedy Lamarr, I guess, to be a genius, unfortunately. You ready for the next one?
I'm ready for the next one.
Okay.
What do we got?
We got solar energy, the first solar energy patent, 1888, to another fellow named Weston. And this one, you got to look at the picture to appreciate this. He used something called a thermopile. And a thermopile is set up when you have 2 dissimilar materials, and you just connect them at either end. And when you heat them up differentially, it causes a current to flow. But what this guy did is he put basically a magnifying lens that would focus the sun's energy, and then he had these 2 dissimilar materials in almost an accordion shape. So one part of them was getting a whole lot more of the sun's energy than the other, and so a current would flow. And this was 1888. And this Weston guy, in addition to in basically inventing the first solar panel, he invented a whole lot of stuff in basically thermoelectricity. And he was so he was so enamored with it, he had a son and he gave him the middle name of Faraday. And I have to look at my cheat sheet here to see what else
At least that was his middle name.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's.
Speaking of names, you mentioned a couple. Just to digress for a moment, you mentioned a couple moments ago Albert Einstein.
Yes.
Speaking of Albert Einstein, you may or may not know. You may be familiar with the comedian Albert Brooks. He's been around for quite some time.
Yes.
He's
Blazing Saddles, I believe.
I'm sorry?
Blazing Saddles.
No.
Mel Brooks.
That was Mel Brooks.
Okay.
Albert Brooks was in broadcast news.
Okay.
And he's done stand-up. His family name, he adopted Brooks. I'm not sure if it's his middle name or not.
Okay.
But his family name, Einstein.
Oh my. Okay.
He was born Albert Einstein and had to go through life and high school in the 60s as Albert Einstein.
That must have been pretty brutal.
How many times do you think he heard, "You're no Einstein"?
Yeah.
His brother, by the way, Albert's brother, side note, is or was Bob Einstein, Super Dave.
Okay. Really?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
They're brothers.
Okay. I didn't know that.
But Super Dave at least got the name Bob.
Yeah.
Poor Albert got
Yeah.
Albert. And speak of great names, their father was a comedian. Sorry for the digression. Their father was a comedian in the 40s or 50s, and his stage name, I forget what his first name was, but his stage name was Park Your Carcass. Anyway, sorry.
That's good.
The
That's
digression.
good.
Where are we at?
We're
on the solar panel.
We're talking
I got
about
us off on the
other
solar,
great
sorry.
things Edward Weston did.
Right.
So anyway, he developed an electrochemical cell called the Weston cell. He was a competitor of Thomas Edison, and he invented the early stages of the voltmeter, the ammeter, and the wattmeter. He patented the saturated cadmium cell, and he developed the film speed ratings for the measurement of film speeds.
No kidding.
So yeah, a rather well-rounded fellow.
Prolific.
One thing that impresses me about some of these inventors that we're talking about is they were smart in a whole lot of areas.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine Hedy Lamarr? Okay, we got torpedoes, we got the Concorde, we got dog collars, we got a stoplight. And those are just the things that are easy to find out about her. We got Weston here who's, basically doing anything related to electrochemistry. He's doing all that. Some of these people, and Steve Jobs.
Right.
He had patents. Everybody knows about his patents in computers and software, but a lot of people don't know he had patents in office design, in yachts, all sorts of stuff. Just very, very wide-ranging intellect.
Well, speaking of, are we done with the solar?
Yeah, we're done with solar.
Well,
the
perfect segue.
Pictures Jason's show will explain everything wonderfully and just how ingenious this was.
Right. Great. Well, speaking of Steve Jobs, we can talk about patent number D, like David,
yes.
D618677, issued almost 14 years ago on June 29th of 2010, to a number, well, it was, there were quite a number of inventors, and the title of the patent is, get this, electronic device. What good is that?
That's descriptive, isn't it? Yeah.
Now, I mentioned that the patent number is D618677. Eric, what does the D mean at the front end?
Design patent.
Design patent. And since I already kind of previewed or telegraphed, this is the design patent, one of the design patents for the iPhone.
Yep.
And so it was invented. There are probably, it looks like there's about 10 inventors, including Steve Jobs. And the assignee is Apple Inc., of course.
Of course, yes.
And it'll be interesting to see, and we can talk about this. It'll be interesting to see the pictures. But really what the design patent speaks to is the curved features of the iPhone itself,
yes,
rather than square edges and ends of the iPhone.
Yeah.
And that's enough to justify a design patent.
And to justify a very healthy verdict in Apple's favor.
Right.
Yeah.
And how many years did they litigate that?
Many.
Many.
Yeah, yeah. So if I could just
sure
jump in, one thing that this patent, the judgment award from this patent did is it got people to stop thinking of design patents as just some funny little
That's
sideline.
Right.
Where you get a design patent when you don't have a chance of getting a utility patent. And obviously here we've got a functional device that can save the life of a rockfish. We've got a funny little mug that Craig Ferguson would pretend to bite people with on his late night show. So and that was in many cases the general impression of design patents. But people started paying a lot more attention after this verdict, and we have even areas like wheels and things like that where people are realizing, well, let's protect the shape of it, because the shape is first of all, design patents, they're cheaper than utility patents. They usually take less time to get examined. They have a much better success rate. The success rate for design patents is generally 95% or so. The success rate for utility patents hovers, around 50-60%, and it takes a lot longer to prosecute a utility patent and fight over all those claims than it does for the examiner to look at the pictures and say, well, yeah, I haven't seen a wheel like that. We're going to give you the patent.
And even if it's just a design patent, you still get to say, I have a patent.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
I have an enforceable patent.
Or in this case, you can say, I have 3 patents, and the
Right.
combination together renders Samsung's version of this to be infringing. And, you know, when you...
Now, in trying to recall Samsung's defense to the Apple lawsuits, wasn't it essentially, you got to be kidding?
Yeah. 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 And the court felt differently, and they've
Yeah.
kicked it back and forth. As I recall, and I could be wrong on this, but as I understand it, the final judgment after all the appeals and all that was that Apple got, I think, $533 million in change for infringement of its design patents. They got $5 million in change for infringement of its utility patents, and the disparity between that
huge.
just threw people off, and it made them realize, wow, these design patents are really worth something. And so I think that it pretty much revolutionized a lot of people's thinking about design patents, and got a lot of companies thinking, okay, well, we may be able to get a utility patent on the function of our item. Maybe we should also get a design patent on it, or perhaps get a design patent on some key features of the item.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a case where the patent itself perhaps wasn't as important as the resulting judgment in terms of taking it seriously.
I don't know if they did or didn't. I could look it up, but do you think that the Perrier bottled water company might have been able to get a patent on the shape of the Perrier bottle because it was so unique?
Yeah, one thing about design patents, and this would be worth a course in and of itself, is the overlap between design patents and trademarks.
I was going to mention
Like, for example,
trademarks and trade dress.
Yeah, the Coca-Cola bottle. That's something where you could get a design patent on it. Certainly, it had at that point a unique shape, but it was so intensely imbued in the consciousness of the American public. Oh, that's a Coke bottle, that you could get a trademark on it as well. And so, yeah, I think the Perrier bottle is unique. The Absolute vodka bottle. All these things are areas where, now again, we're talking about big, huge companies for whom $5,000 or $10,000 into a few patents is nothing. But I think it's something even that first-time inventors should be thinking about.
We had a small startup company. This goes back 10 or 15 years ago. Husband and wife who came up with a very nice line of organic dog shampoo and dog conditioner.
Okay.
And they did a couple, that was a good product, a very good product.
Yeah.
They came up with a great little trademark for it. And they also came up with a very clever way of packaging it. Rather than put it in a typical or traditional shampoo container, they designed a container for the dog shampoo and the dog conditioner that looked like a dog bone.
Okay.
When it sat on the shelf, about that big.
Okay. All right.
And it was before you and I knew each other.
Yeah.
And we worked with another patent attorney, and they were able to get a design patent.
For sure.
And we were able to get them a trade dress registration.
Great.
Because the nice thing about trade dress, under trademark, if you will, is you don't have that 1-year rule to worry about. But we did have to prove that the shape was somewhat unique and identifiable.
Right.
Whereas the design patent went through pretty quickly.
Sure.
Now, just to digress for a moment, one of the funny things about this is, as you know, in order to get a trade dress registration, you have to be able to show that the shape that you're claiming is not functional.
Right.
It's ornamental.
Yes.
By definition, it's got to be ornamental.
Yeah.
Now, somebody once said to me, how did you get a trade dress registration for the ornamental design of a a bottle for a dog shampoo and conditioner that looks like a dog bone.
Yeah.
Dogs like dog bones. And my response was, but dogs don't buy shampoo and conditioner.
Right.
Humans do.
I'd say it's the perfect answer.
And that was...
Yeah, yeah.
And we didn't have a problem. The trademark office didn't have a problem with it.
Great. Oh, that's wonderful.
But that's a case where a small business, a family-owned business, was able to utilize all of these things, trademark, trade dress, and patent at the same time to get a little IP protection.
Good, good. Yeah, I'd say as a practice tip for those of you who aren't IP attorneys, oftentimes a client will come to you and they'll have in their mind a specific thing they need. They'll say, I really need a patent on this name, or I really want to trademark my invention.
Right.
And so it's really good. I have some 3 little articles I've written on these things. I give away to all my clients or prospective clients that detail the difference between a patent, a trademark, and a copyright, because there's so much initial confusion. And I'm sure you run into the
run into that all the time. I mean, I had this kind of realization a couple of years ago that essentially I've been asked the same question for 35 or 40 years, which is, I have a new something.
Yeah.
I have a new invention. I have a new idea. I have a new product. I have a new name. How do I protect it?
Yeah. What do I do?
What do I do?
Yeah, I get that.
And then our job is to help figure out what it is they got, what they might, and whether it's patent, trademark, copyright, trade secret, and in what sequence.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree.
And people misuse the terms all the time. Like you said, I want to patent my name, I want to trademark my invention. But that's okay, you know.
Yeah, I know. I get a lot of, I want to copyright my invention.
Right.
And then that gets a little tricky, because then you have to say, well, you could copyright your owner's manual, or you could copyright the pictures, your drawings, but that's just copywriting that particular artistic version. It's not protecting the invention. To protect the invention, you need to think about a patent, and that's usually a hard one to explain.
And I was just thinking, before we wrap up and move on to the next one, before we wrap up on the Apple design patent, I thought it was we could talk for a minute about going back to claims and what's different about the claim in a design patent as opposed to the claims in a utility patent.
Yeah, well, with a design patent, the claim, it says, I claim the ornamental design for a fill in the blank.
Electronic device.
I have a template for design patents, and that's exactly what it says.
Right.
I claim the ornamental design for a, and I have in brackets invention. The invention goes under the title as well. So I just replace both of those with the same thing. And so your claim are your drawings. You usually have 7 drawings, which would be, I'll do it for the camera, a front view, a back view, a right side view, a left side view, a top view, a bottom view, and a perspective view. And that's what your patent is. Your patent is your drawings, which is why you have to have your drawings done well.
How is the average person then supposed to read a design patent and understand what is and isn't covered by that design patent?
They look at the pictures, and they look for solid lines, which mean we claim it as part of our design, and they look for dashed lines, which means that we're disclaiming this part of the invention. We're not claiming this. So, for example, on this wheel patent right here, we've got the face. We've got the face of the wheel that's claimed, and we've got the barrel that's not claimed, because what we're trying to avoid here is a situation where they copy our front, and in the barrel they put like a little Mickey Mouse head or something like that, and then they say, well, you know, we avoided your design patent, when the Mickey Mouse head in the barrel, you're not even going to see it because it's going to be covered by the tire. And in those particular patents, each one of them is a little bit different, and they've all disclaimed different parts. And that was one of, I think, the telling and important parts of this, is that Apple is able to say, well, we don't have a single patent that covers what you're doing, but the combination of these 3 patents cover everything you're doing. And the court agreed with them, and that was kind of interesting for us patent practitioners. I know that after this verdict, I began to advise people a lot more on design patents
Right.
than I was before.
And are people taking you up on it?
Yeah, yeah, they are. They are.
Right.
It depends on the size of the client. If you have a client with tons of money, then it's pretty easy
Right.
to do, a patent on a wheel, a patent on one spoke of the wheel, a utility patent on the function of something. If if you have a client who doesn't have much money, intellectual property it's like the opposite of life insurance. With life insurance, you're betting on yourself dying before the life insurance company thinks you're going to die. With intellectual property, you're betting on yourself succeeding before you've succeeded, and
Right.
that's always hard. I've certainly had tons of clients who have gotten a patent and fallen flat on their face. They haven't made a dime off it. And then I've had other clients who got patents on things that I didn't think were all that impressive that made quite a bit of money because they got in the hands of the right person or something like that. So,
right.
yeah, I wish I had a Ouija board and I could just, determine which clients were going to succeed, but I don't.
Well, I think we're down to the last two, are we?
We are.
Okay.
It looks like we're kind of running out of time a little bit, so I'll do this a little bit.
You guys are good. Take your time.
We're good? Okay. All right. So I've got a patent from 2000, patent number 6073115, and this is the virtual reality generator.
Wow.
So anyway, this was interesting because this particular patent, and when you see the drawings on this one, you're going to be surprised. It was for giving people a virtual reality world that relates to financial data of all things. Yeah. And so generally, not games. No. It was financial data. So I guess you get on Quicken and you look through. Okay, there's my checking account. There's my savings account. Oh my goodness, there's my bills. Maybe bills show up in red or something like that. But yeah, so the idea came up for something completely different than its main use. And obviously, with virtual reality, the main use right now is for games, and as well as for training.
Would that original patent, though, depending on how the claim or claims are written, be limited to financial data and not be seen by a court to include gaming, do you think?
Well, let's look at the claim and see. The claims. The claim one is, I'll summarize this, a virtual reality generator to display abstract information, blah, blah, blah. Input module, receiving the information, user interface, a virtual reality generator, wherein the user simulates the movement, interacts. This looks like it's not limited to financial data. So I'd say that this, when it was granted 2000, it's expired by now, but it hopefully Paul Stephen Marshall made some money off the earlier virtual reality headsets and things like that. But virtual reality right now, in addition to the gaming, is used a lot in pilot training.
Right.
And other types of training, police training, things along those lines, where being in a virtual reality environment gives you a much better idea of spatial orientation, and especially where you have to take actions. For example, if you're a pilot, if you just have a computer in front of you saying, you're 50 feet above the runway, it's not quite like being in that cockpit and with virtual reality on all sides. You see this runway coming up. For example, in the Sully Sullenberger miracle on the Hudson, they would simulate to other pilots how much time you had to try to make it to another airport. And I think that it was a lot more telling when you saw them trying to navigate and it said pull up, terrain, and you see the virtual reality of their plane crashing into Manhattan or something like that. I mean, it really drives home the fact, okay, this guy had 45 seconds to make up his mind. He made up his mind in the right way. So anyway.
Amazing.
They're using virtual reality right now in training doctors as well. So medical technology, and it's so very exciting field. And again, it seems like I have a 15-year-old son, so virtual reality has been a real part of our lives
Sure.
for a number of years now. But it's kind of amazing that this was first patented just a few years before he was born.
Kind of incredible.
Yeah. What else do you have?
All right. Last but not least, somewhat related, I have patent number 8139102, issued in March of 2012, so just 10 years ago.
10 years ago.
For what's described as vision system for an vision system for an autonomous vehicle. Basically, self-driving vehicles.
Okay, why didn't they just put that, I wonder?
I don't know.
I don't know. It's impressive sometimes, I guess.
I don't know. And the short summary is a system that includes a vehicle management system and at least a first, second, and third video camera in communication with the vehicle management system. The vehicle management system is configured to receive input from a combination of at least 2 cameras selected from among the first, second, and third cameras based on an event associated with the vehicle to provide at least a first, second, and third visual depth of field.
Wow. Okay.
And this was only 10 years ago.
10 years ago, yeah. And you've driven in a self-driving car, haven't you?
I have driven in a semi-autonomous self-driving car in a Tesla.
Okay.
A couple of years ago. And now I am just started driving a 2022 Volvo that has some I wouldn't exactly call it self-driving, but it has some lane correction features in it. So if I'm driving on a certain kind of road with the right kind of markers in the road, and I veer to the left or veer to the right, the car will self-correct.
Are those new orange strips?
I think they are.
That are on the freeway? Yeah, I've just noticed them recently.
And so this patent, from the reading I did, was really the outgrowth of a contest sponsored by DARPA, the defense group, the US, looking for autonomous self-driving vehicles for military situations where basically they didn't want to put humans in harm's way if they didn't have to. And so they had they set up but they needed to move material on the ground. And they set up this contest for who could create a vehicle that would be able to go X number of miles in this kind of terrain without human intervention. And then this was one of the winning entries.
Yeah.
And it was issued to a company that I've never heard of. That doesn't mean that they're not serious, but Oshkosh Corporation out of Oshkosh, Wisconsin.
I thought they made clothes, little kids' clothes.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Right.
Maybe they're branching out, little kids' clothes and auto driving cars.
But one of the things that I found, there are a couple of things I found interesting about this patent, including the pages.
Man, look at those references cited.
Yeah. Of cited references. What do these mean, Eric? Those
cited references cited are things that were either found by the examiner or by the applicant, and the examiner is supposed to check each one. Now, if the patent is later challenged for invalidity, the person challenging the patent has to find something outside of the references cited. So generally, you try to put down as many references as are possibly related to the invention, because it may be harder for you to get a patent, but it's going to be a stronger patent if you get one.
Dumb question. With all these cited references, is this patent that was issued therefore limited by the prior references, meaning nothing that's in these prior references that was patented can be claimed by this inventor?
No, it just
Okay.
means it just means that if somebody thinks this patent shouldn't have been granted, they're going to have to find something other than these references, which is looking at the rather long list. I believe you even have some papers cited here on the next page.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Other publications.
Other publications. Okay,
Right.
so that's a monster. I mean, if you want to challenge this patent, good luck, because you're going to be having to look at the Chinese patent database and the Mongolian patent database and Latvian patent database to find something to challenge this, I'd say.
And is this unusual? It has, this patent has 23 drawings.
No, for something like this, I think that's fairly average. And looking at the drawings, it appears they're very well done.
Yeah.
And they very clearly, especially the drawings of the terrain, they very clearly show what the invention does. So yeah, I'd say.
And then a lot of the patent will describe what's in the figures, right?
Yes, yes.
Got it.
That's why you have the numbers, so you can say
Yeah.
engine 24 powers wheels 26, and camera 1, camera 2, and camera 3 monitor the external environment.
The other thing I thought was interesting, and this goes back to something we talked about earlier, and this one has 33 claims.
Okay, so that would have cost them a little bit more to file because you get 20 claims for your filing fee.
Ah,
But
okay.
with this type of invention, I certainly would have put in a whole lot of claims, hoping you're going to get something. Basically, with the claims, you have independent claims. These begin with the word A, and you have dependent claims that begin with the word the. And so essentially, you try with your independent claims to get as few limitations as possible, and then you add to them with the dependent claims. And so you try different combinations to see what the examiner is going to go for.
And I know this would be the subject for a whole session unto itself, but if the owner of this patent or any patent wants to establish in a court of law that their patent was infringed,
yes,
do they have to prove to the satisfaction of the court or the jury that just some of the claims were infringed or all of the claims?
If one claim is infringed,
even just one, out of 33.
Yes, exactly. That's why with a patent like this, you probably file 60 claims. And if you look at the prosecution history, which with an issued patent, anybody can get on something called public pair on the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office website. You can look at the prosecution history. My guess is initially they would have filed with 60 claims or so. The USPTO examiner would have said, no, we're not going to give you all of these. And then they would have had to amend the claims to get this eventual patent. They probably filed what's called a child patent off of this, which tried to claim more territory as well. And so oftentimes when the USPTO says no, that just means no for a few of your claims. You get the rest, then you try to file a continuation or continuation in part on additional claims to try to broaden your patent reach.
And do we know, or can we speculate whether Tesla and GM and Ford are all licensing this inventor's technology, or have they invented their own self-driving vehicles?
I don't know that. You could look at the assignment data, which is also public record, to see if by chance he assigned his patent over to Elon Musk.
Yeah.
And then you'd know, well, okay, so Elon Musk and Tesla own this technology now. Or he could have just made some licensing deals. Normally with licensing deals, both the licensor and the licensee don't want those details to be public because they don't want to know, if you're the licensor, you don't want other potential licensees to know how much you're taking, because then they say, well, we're smaller than Tesla, we want to pay less, and then you'd say, well, yeah, but Elon Musk took his deal early, so I want you to pay more than he did, and it just gets ugly. It's much easier to say I want this amount for a license for my patent.
Well, there we have it. I think we've got 10 fascinating patents that change the world.
I agree completely. Well, thank you again for watching. We appreciate that. And if you have any other ideas for other MCLEs that you think would be entertaining, please let us know or let Jason know, and we'll try to do our best. Thanks again for watching.
Thank you very much.